Hello, Tim from Fair Play Now on the 1st of July 2023, and as promised I've got the talk I went to, the video I shot of it ready now, the Mad Mix Conspiracies talk, and following on from this little intro will be the first 10 or 15 minutes of his talk, which is highly fascinating. He's talking about the pyramids, ancient Egypt, and that kind of thing, and why a lot of stuff to do with modern archaeology and what they say just doesn't add up, and what he thinks might have happened in the past instead. And then from there he goes on to talk about, well, basically why there's so many conspiracies around and why so many people are so-called conspiracy theorists. And when you look at these things, you'll find out why. You know, if you watch this video, you'll find out why. You know, it's certain events where kind of explosions have happened and things have supposedly gone through people's legs, but and causing them sort of massive injuries. But why is there no hole in their trousers? You know, they've got the badly injured leg, but the trousers they're wearing hasn't got any sign of a hole in it. And he's asking questions like this. That comes later on in the video. You'll have to watch the full thing after the intro bit to see that bit of it, but you know, I've just given you a little bit of a taster and encouragement, incentive to go and watch the whole thing. But yeah, he asks the whole video, the whole talk, he's asking questions like that. Well, you know, if this happened like they say, the mainstream narrative says, well, why is this over here like that? Surely it should be like that, you know. And he's constantly asking these questions all the way through the talk. So very, very interesting stuff, very, very eye-opening stuff. And when you watch it, you'll come to realise that many, many events that have happened in the last kind of 50, 60 years aren't what you think they are. Obviously they're still bad, but not bad in the way that you've been told. It's sort of a whole nother level of badness, I suppose you could say. So what I'll do is carry on watching this. The first 10 or 15 minutes of Mad Mix's talk will follow, and if you want to watch the whole thing, go to my website, fairplaynow.net/must, and I'll put a link to it in the description box below here anyway, so you can click through and watch that there. It'll be the first, when you get to that page, it'll be the first big red button at the top. It'll be obvious, just click on the red button, you'll go through to my Rumble and you can watch the whole video there. It goes on for about an hour and a half. Anyway, carry on watching and I'll be back with you soon. Tim from Fair Play Now, thanks for watching.
Right, I became a conspiracy theorist when I was a very young man. I went to Egypt for the first time in my early 20s, and I went to the Great Pyramid, and I was in awe of it. So I bought a load of books on Egyptology, but they were mainstream books, and they told me that the pyramids, there's 118 pyramids in Egypt. 106 of them, no, 110 of them look like this. But there's only 6 stone pyramids that are still standing.
In Egypt.
In Egypt. This is supposedly the first pyramid ever built at the end of the 3rd dynasty. Now the problem was they went from the Stone Age to building this, building the next 6 stone pyramids, and then not being able to build pyramids anymore. They just forgot. They lost the technology. And this was 3,000 years BC. Dynasty 3. This was the end of Dynasty 3. Now, underneath this pyramid, there's 5 miles of tunnel. No, sorry, 5 kilometres, 3.5 miles of tunnels under this pyramid. And in those tunnels, they found something that I'm going to touch on later on, right? But this is the Great Pyramid over here. The Great Pyramid of Giza. This is the Giza Plateau. So these three pyramids were built by the father, the son, and then the grandson. This is the biggest pyramid in Egypt. It's got 2.5 million stones. They range from 2.5 tons up to 100 tons in weight. And the Egyptians moved them, they quarried them about 100 or so miles up the Nile in Aswan, and then they moved the giant stones all the way down on the Nile on barges, apparently, all the way down, and they made these pyramids. This is the Great Pyramid. This pyramid, inside the chambers and the measurements, are all the pi, Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio. They're all within this pyramid, in the dimensions of this pyramid. And obviously the Sphinx in the same area. They say that this is water damage on the Sphinx. It could be up to 10,000 years old. These are supposedly 3,000 years, 5,000 years, 3,000 BC, sorry. Right, now, this pyramid, with its 2.5 million stones, supposedly took 20 years to be built. But they tell us that the father of the guy who made this was a guy called Snefru. And they tell us that he made all three of these pyramids in a 27-year time span. Now this pyramid is similar in size to the middle pyramid. And they think that we believe that he made three of them in the same time it took to make one. Makes no sense. And then after these were built, they finished with that one. They stopped building those big pyramids. They were all covered in casing stones like this. You can see the casing stones. I'll talk about the casing stones of the small pyramid in a second. They all look like this, but the casing stones have all been robbed. This was a pyramid. It went from there up into a point and down there. I think that the Egyptians found these pyramids. Every single pyramid has got different phases of construction. And I think that the dynastic Egyptians found these pyramids and added onto them to make them look what they are. I mean, this was clearly a tower and they built it up to a pyramid. The Great Pyramid is surrounded by this basalt stone. This stone is incredibly hard and they've cut it to fit over the stone that's there and flat on the top. So somehow they had the technology to cut this stone and lay it flat over rough terrain. And it was all the way round. It ties up a little bit with the Bible. If any of you guys have read the Bible, apparently there was a black shiny pavement around Mount Sinai. And all the Israelites could surround the mountain. Well, the mountain in Egypt, it is in Egypt, but Mount Sinai, what they say is Mount Sinai, is too big. It's like a massive mountain range. Whereas when you think about this, you could get a few thousand people surrounding the pyramid whilst Moses goes inside. The Ark of the Covenant fits nicely into the sarcophagus in the Great Pyramid. But I do digress. The Red Pyramid. Again, 2.5 ton stones up to 100 tons. The chambers in here are massive. Like, it's got bigger chambers than the Great Pyramid. Absolutely amazing. This one, the Bent Pyramid. Egyptology tells us that what they did is they were building it, then it went wrong, so they changed its angle and then carried on and finished it and then put all the casing stones up. So if they've made a mistake, why would they have carried on? I believe that this is this shape because it was meant to be this shape. I don't know why, but I do not think that was a mistake. Now, this pyramid, you can see they build up these towers and then they built the pyramid up against it. So we'll look at the small pyramid. This is the timeline. This is the beginning of Egyptology, 3100 BC. The pyramid builders. Then Tutankhamun is 1,000 years away from the pyramid builders. So to Dynasty 18, these are ancient. They had no idea how they got there or how they built them. These people were burying their kings in tombs, dug into mountains in the Valley of the Kings. And then it goes all the way up to Cleopatra and Jesus' time. Right, this is the smallest pyramid in Giza, the Giza Plateau. And you can see they've, to break into the entrance, they dug all the way through here. And the bricks have fallen away. But you can see inside that it's flat. So I believe that it's probably looked just like that before they built a pyramid up against it. Because you can see it's a flat brick wall in there. But one of the strangest things with this pyramid, and I'll mention it quickly, is the casing stones. Around the entrance, the casing stones are all made flat, like we saw on the Bent Pyramid. But all these casing stones, they're still rough. The Egyptians never finished it. It makes no sense. It was all meant to be flat like that, like all the other pyramids were, but it never got finished. Heaven only knows why. So maybe they all looked like this at one time and the Egyptians found them, and then later on, the later dynasties of the Egyptians didn't have a clue how they got there or who built them. They just refer them back to the oldest king that they can think of and say, oh, he built it, because they didn't know who did it. But this guy, this is Ramesses the Great. He was pharaoh in Egypt in the 18th dynasty for 60 years. And in that 60 years, he looted most of Egypt of the casing stones of the pyramids. So the pyramids look like they look now because other pharaohs along the line nicked all the casing stones to use them for other things. The Romans also did it, but mainly the pharaohs. But this guy was the worst. But the reason he was the worst was because he was pharaoh for the longest. And so his tomb, like he's all over Egypt, are tombs and statues of this guy, all with stones that he has stolen from other people, which is what generally goes on. And we still do that today. We come across a site, we build on top of it. Mexico's built on ancient ruins. So the Egyptians were doing it for thousands of years. This is my favourite Egyptian, Akhenaten. So see how he looks very strange. You see he's got this elongated face. Mainstream archaeology says that what they did when he was pharaoh is they changed the style of their art and made it more stylistic. But I don't believe that's the case. I believe he actually looked like this. You can see he's got ladies' hips, he's got breasts under there, we'll see it again in the next picture. He's got these very strange eyes, he's got no male parts, he's clearly got breasts. Maybe he was a hermaphrodite, but he certainly doesn't look like us. Look at these eyes. In every depiction of him, he's got these weird eyes, this long face. He doesn't look like any other Egyptian pharaoh, and he certainly doesn't look like us.
And the shape of the forehead.
The head, we're going to look at the head. There's the head. The head, again, if you're an Egyptian pharaoh and you're going to pay someone to make statues of you, you'd expect them to make them look exactly the way you look. And if they didn't, you'd just have them destroyed. So this is fair to say that his head did actually look like this. With his very weird lips, face, very different to us. And he was pharaoh, and he took all his people out of Thebes, the capital city, and he said, we're not going to believe in all the gods anymore, Ra and Isis and all these. We're only going to believe in one god, the sun disk. So he took all his people along the Nile, and 400 miles up the Nile we built a city called Amarna. But two different authors, Sigmund Freud, you've heard of him, and Ahmed Osman, have both suggested that the story of Akhenaten and the story of Moses are two very similar stories. So they've suggested that it's possible that Akhenaten and Moses were one and the same person. Now, if you watch Ancient Aliens will have you believe that this guy's an alien. So mainstream, because Ancient Aliens is on mainstream television, mainstream are telling us that Moses was an alien. And the 12 tribes of Israel that descended from Moses were bloodlines of the aliens. They obviously went across Europe and became the royal families, and King Charles III is a descendant of an alien. That's what you get from ancient aliens on the television. It might be true, it might be. This guy looks nothing like anyone else that I've ever seen. So anything's possible. Let's have a little look at him. Got breasts, women's hips, almost exactly the same as his wife, Nefertiti, and their daughter. So, was he a man? Was he a woman? Was he an alien? Was he Moses? Too many questions, but it's the most fantastic part of Egyptology for me. He's Tutankhamun's dad, Nefertiti, his wife, the most famous Egyptian woman. Now, back to the first pyramid ever built, allegedly. These pots are made out of stone. Not just stone, but incredibly hard stone. And there was 40,000 of these found underneath the step pyramid of Saqqara, the first ever pyramid. 40,000 stone pots that today they can't make. There was no will. When they found these, like in Dynasty 3, there was no will. They didn't have the will. It hadn't been invented. But somehow they made these pots. And it gets even better, because this was under there as well. The schist disc, they call this. Now, this is made out of stone. No one knows what it is or why it is, but it's made out of stone. It can't be carved today. Engineers wouldn't know how to do it today. But it looks to me, you know, if you get plasticine and you pinch plasticine and stretch it, it looks to me that these three were stretched into place. They clearly started off there and then were bent over and stretched. So, the ancients clearly had a technology that could soften stone. This is very hard stone, very brittle, but they had a technology that could soften stone and make these things incredibly thin. Moving on, look at this. Humans do things that are easy to do. We don't make things hard for ourselves. We always take the path of least resistance, a bit like water. So why would we do this? This is up a mountain. These stones have come up a mountain. These range from about 30 tons up to 60, 70, 80 tons. And they're on a mountain. And they've made them all like this jigsaw. But you see, they're all sticking out a bit like marshmallow, and also a bit like the stones on the pyramid. This is in South America, Machu Picchu. Somehow they fitted these stones together. I believe that the ancients had a technology to soften stones, which is why they look like a little bit like marshmallow, all being piled together. But they didn't just make one wall. They built a whole side of a mountain with these crazy stones. Over 100 tons, this one. There's no explanation as to why they did it. Mainstream archaeology would have us believe the Incas did it about 500 years ago. They didn't have the technology to do that 500 years ago. They didn't have the technology to do it 3,000 years ago, because it's a technology that we don't understand. Whoops, getting carried away there with my button. This is a technology that we don't understand. And they say that this was done with hammer and chisel, guys sitting there all day, hammering and chiseling to make this nice big jigsaw for us. Makes no sense. This is the repair done by the Incas. That's what Inca stonework looks like. Not this. Anyway, moving on. Pumapunku, H-shaped blocks. Now, they've analysed these blocks. These are thousands of years old. And they've decided that these were moulded. These were some kind of injection moulding, because this is a geopolymer, like a concrete. So these giant H-shaped blocks, it was a big site. But again, they tell us it was about 500 years to 1,000 years ago. But they didn't have the technology back then. So again, hidden technology. This is again in South America. So much hidden technology that we don't know about. Stones, look how big this stone is. These stones were cut. This one was abandoned and then moved. How on earth can you move a stone? This is about 1,000 tons. How do they move these giant stones? This is the question that's always bugged me. And they tell us that, you see, they cut it smooth even underneath. This is in Baalbek, Lebanon. You can see they've chiselled this smooth. This isn't a guy with a hammer and chisel, and then they're just going to put that on logs and roll it to the next place. Because these stones were used in this building. This is the Temple of Apollo in Lebanon. And it's a Roman temple. And they would have us believe that the Romans put these there. Right? But these stones are 1,000 tons. And these bottom ones here, these shorter ones, are 300 tons. Now I believe that the Romans came across it and used it and built their temple on top of these stones. Because the Romans don't explain anywhere how they managed to move 1,000-ton stones. And the Romans used to write everything down. They used to tell us everything they did. If they were going to build a viaduct, roads, whatever, they told us how they did it. But they never told us how they moved 1,000-ton stones. So mainstream archaeology would have us believe that this was the Romans. But they never claimed it as themselves. I believe, again, like what we saw in Egypt, this is a technology that was discovered by the Romans and just built upon. Back to him. The Egyptians carved this. The symmetry on these statues is amazing. You make a mistake, how do you undo it? And then they were going to stand this up and they were going to move it across Egypt. Like this. This is the trilithon. This is about half a mile from the Step Pyramid. We've spoken a lot about the Step Pyramid. This is not trilithon, this is the Serapeum, sorry, at Saqqara. About half a mile from the Step Pyramid. These tunnels go on. When they found these tunnels, the first discoverers, so they didn't get lost, they went through with rope. And they run out of rope. These tunnels are so long, they don't even know where they end. But there's 24 of these sarcophaguses. And these are made out of granite. And they're massive. We're going to have a little look. And these were carved, shiny. You could see your face in them. Now there's writing on them, which is graffiti. I'll talk about that in a second. But this is inside a box. They are so square. You can't, you're shining the torch through. The light doesn't shine through. Right? So these are exact, these are precise. This is technology that they didn't have. The Egyptians just didn't have this technology. This, I believe, was found. And somehow they got them in tunnels underneath the desert. Heaven only knows how. But I think the Egyptians found them. And then, mainstream archaeology, again, they say that this tells us who created these. But this, to me, looks like graffiti on something they found. They've tried to claim it for themselves. Look at that. If they have the technology to make those boxes, precision, I won't even try with the word again, but you know what I mean. And then they just chisel that on it. And that's acceptable to them. And mainstream archaeology says, oh, well, look at that. It was written by those people, which is in the 5th dynasty, about 500 years BC. Rubbish. These were found, and the Egyptians, again, they usurped them like they did with pretty much most things. This is back to the valley of back to Giza. This is the temple, the Sphinx temple, the Valley Temple, sorry, next to the Sphinx. You see, they build these stones going round corners. We don't do that. We build our bricks like this. They obviously had a technology to be able to do this. Why would we do it? We wouldn't. There's no logic in it unless it was easy to do. So this technology to them must have been easy, or they wouldn't bother. They'd have just put a block facing that way and a block facing that way and some cement.